listening to the Adventure Party for the third week of November 2021. This week, it's a 3-round burst of burning gaming questions, which was 66% from genuine listeners. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and rated gaming the Irish way.
In 1998, a crack podcast unit was sent to Gaelcom by the IGA for a crime they didn't commit. These men promptly escaped from a maximum security LARP to the Dublin Underground. Today, still wanted by the authorities, they survive as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A Party. Welcome.
There's actual, completely unlicensed music playing behind this as we descend in our chopper to another clinic. I don't know why we've called it the clinic, and we've kind of conflated it with the A-Team. But I like it. It's what we do here. Conflation.
We're here to treat you and make sure that you're not sick anymore.
With percussive treatments. Explosions! Great deal of gasoline cans and montages. Speaking of montages, we're doing a bit of a grab bag today, aren't we?
Yeah, I put out some feelers for a variety of interesting questions and got some responses, and other people got some responses too. We think we have enough to put a few people on the off the waiting list. Okay, do we want to start with some of the things I managed to drum up from our loyal listeners?
Yep.
Yeah, who wants?
Okay.
Warlord Scarr, why don't you read the first one?
Okay, let me just get the exact text. Don't want to misquote someone. Okay, so this one is from long-time podcast contributor Conrad Kinch. And it is in relation to specifically Fate, but applies to many RPGs. And this is his problem. He is baffled by instances where there are lots of modifiers to rolls. Fate does this with aspects, but lots of games have situations where there can be a number of modifiers to a roll, and I get bored. I've really taken the 5E's roll with advantage or disadvantage system, which seems to short-circuit that. Am I just not man enough to do it properly? What's the fix? This question intrigues me because it's as much about mechanics as it is about player psychology. I feel like I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I do know that there are people who want to get a total on their dice plus modifier, and there are people who want to get a target number. They don't really care what you add to the dice. They want to know what number on the dice do I need. Can I roll that now? That's a very, it's something I notice dealing with a lot of gamers.
It's actually a GM psychology thing more than it's a player psychology thing. Players are perfectly happy to count up 1 million modifiers before their one roll. It's the GM who runs out of patience and just goes, oh god, can I just do this? Because the players are always out-rolling me because they're prepared to go, okay, I get the flanking bonus, I get the outnumbering bonus, I get the bonus from heroism, I get the bonus from my swinging cod, and then I use my sword two-handed and use my third hand to counterbalance, and I use my fourth hand to manipulate my wand of true strike. They are going to care about that to get basically a super high modifier. The GM is less so, and that's often where the problem clicks in. Now, I'm not a big fan of the advantage and disadvantage systems just because I think it's a little too simple. I could have 1 million sources of disadvantage and 1 source of advantage, and they cancel each other out. Or I could have 1 million sources of advantage and 1 source of disadvantage, and they cancel each other out. Other ones have done a slightly more context-sensitive ones where you total up the number of good things and bad things, and then you get a positive D6 or a negative D6 based on which number is greater.
Yeah, the Shadow of the Demon Lord system.
Yeah, Shadow of the Demon Lord does it like that. Other systems go, you roll a number of good D6s, you cancel out good and bad D6s, and then you have your number of good D6s to go with your D20 roll, say, and you pick the highest one from the good D6s to add to your roll. So it gives you a relatively narrow range, but some value on doing it. Basically, giving a crap about how the modifiers is how you make a game tactical. That, in a simple way. Giving a crap about the modifiers. If you don't do that, your game becomes intensely not tactical, because unless the GM does a huge amount of extra work on, okay, if you don't take the time to sneak up in this guy and engage with the combat the right way, more bad guys show up on my whim. Whereas if you're looking to go and actually we can make the game intensely tactical, fights can be more difficult if you don't take the tactical approach. So if you're not taking advantage of flanking, if you're not taking advantage of surprise, if you're not taking advantage of higher ground, the combat's harder. But when you do take advantage, it's easier, so your tactical choices start to feel like they matter. So it's the reason to do it is that it rewards investment by the players in the situation and then scheming for advantages. The difficulty is it can be a little bit fiddly. Okay, what's the modifier for higher ground? What's the modifier for outnumbering? What's the modifier for thing? And it can be a pain in the ass to remember what does what. So what you want to do is you need to find the sweet spot where you are happy that tactics matters and basically an acceptable level of manageable crunch for you. Like for me, it's whatever, because I'll deal with it. I initially thought the Pathfinder 2's modifiers were very minor, and then I played it and I found actually no, they're super significant. And over the course of long enough play, you notice how important getting the flank is, how important frightening one your opponent is, or sickening one them, or clumsy one them. It doesn't seem like much, but it's actually massive. So yeah, it's about finding the appropriate level. For Conrad, it might just be advantage and disadvantage, though I would suggest something like Demon Lords. Actually, it's a little bit more context sensitive than just advantage disadvantage. The other thing it can turn into a sort of bidding war, with the player going, I've got 3 sources of advantage, and the GM going, hang on a second, it's dark, you're wearing sunglasses, and your trousers are full of salmon roe. So that's 3 sources of disadvantage. Ha, roll straight. So that could be a little bit, back and forth, adversarial. And maybe the GM wants, I've got 4 sources of advantage. The GM goes, yeah, but you're really feeling down today, so 1 disadvantage and nothing for you. You might want that. You might not want that. Up to you.
Savage, do you have a weigh in on this? I know you're not exactly the most numberific of people.
No, but I understand the sentiment that Conrad is expressing, and it is expressing because fundamentally he's impatient. We are finite creatures, and we have not a lot of time on this earth, and we get even less of it to play games and have fun. So waiting around for somebody to calculate up all the different modifiers in a row is tedious. And sometimes we end up doing it ourselves, and it can be embarrassing and frustrating, because we know everyone else, including the GM, is waiting. Everybody's just waiting for the grave. So, how to circumvent some of this? I think it depends largely on the system. I won't say go play a different system. Where you build in these things and how they're expressed is probably partly sort of on the psychology side. Is it the Cortex or Genesis system that was used for the Star Wars special dice?
Genesis. Genesis. Cortex is Marvel superheroes and a couple of things. So,
Genesis does this advantage, disadvantage, and modifiers and circumstantial modifiers thing pretty well by creating pools of dice that you very quickly then roll and get a result. So one way to hide all the advantage, disadvantage stuff is putting it into the dice pool rather than in totting up and adding to a result. Very specific case. More generally, I'd say, have your homework done before you arrive at the table. And that should be any kind of combat-heavy system. If you're running a well-developed character that has a bunch of different options for how they might attack, who they might attack, and when, you should probably have a cheat sheet or two made up so that you know that if you have charged and you're throwing your javelin and you're using your Berserker Rage, that this is the modifier you'll expect to add, allowing for any other sort of stuff that's coming across the GM side of the table. That way, you're not constantly going, you know, to have that prep done. Like when you cook, chop all your veggies first, instead of trying to get it done as they need to go into the pan. Have those modifiers calculated, have those, because you're really going to fall into a specific set of attack patterns. I know when I play combat characters, I'll look at what I've got and try and figure out, what are the things I'm going to do most often. Stat out the top 3. Do I always open a fight with a cleave plus charge? Do I always use an arrow volley plus some sort of hunter's mark for my openers. Do those ones, have those ones ready, and you'll find you'll spend less time mulling over modifiers and more time getting results and just getting on with the game.
I find it interesting you bring up the Genesis system as a way to quickly put together things, because I found a lot of people say the opposite, is that because your dice pool of however 8 or 10 dice, you need to interpret them. Some people find that actually that slows the game down a lot, because they have to go, well, you've technically failed, but like 3 good things happen to you, so you need to come up with something that doesn't get you what you want, but does give you 3 minor advantages to your next roll. And some people, I'm sure, can very quickly put that together into some cohesive narrative, but some people take a time to read the dice, think it through, and will say, well, does this cancel out, or does both a good thing and a bad thing happen?
To which I'd respond that anticipation is kind of an aspect here. It's kind of boring to wait in anticipation for someone to do a little bit of math. It's a bit more interesting to wait for the GM, the arbiter of the game, in anticipation of what they might throw onto the table as a consequence of the dice roll. So I agree, it's probably not going to save you a huge amount of time, really. But as I said, it's the kind of psychology of the thing. Instead of waiting for a very mundane thing that a calculator could do to happen, you're instead waiting for something inspired from your GM or another player. And I think the end results are more satisfying.
That's true, but if I go back to maybe the specific instantiation of it for Fate is very much a game about the players having a massive amount of narrative control, because they can choose which aspects do I use to make this roll work, which aspects do I let the GM inflict on me to, fail a roll but get fate points back. So there's always, every roll has a little bit of negotiation with it. It's just like, do I want to assert this narrative? Do I want the fact that the building is on fire to matter to this roll? So that sort of adds an extra element of like narrative justification needs to be attached to each modifier. And maybe if you're just looking, say, this is the last goblin, why do you need to have a plus 17 to hit him? Can we just not just move on?
Well, you're conflating two things there. Fate doesn't have a kind of plus 17 or whatever. Fate's aspects are a bit more nebulous than just the straight modifiers that Conrad's question suggests. So I'm not really sure why he started there, but...
Well, the 90% of Fate aspect use is I add plus 2 to my roll. Like, yes, you can use it to add things to a scene, or you could use it to re-roll your dice, but most of the time, the best option is just say, I spend a fate point to invoke this aspect and add plus 2 to my roll. Oh, I rolled a minus 2. Do I re-roll, or do I invoke 3 aspects to turn it to a plus 4? That's, I think, is possibly the stumbling block here. It's just like your player starting to cast around for, can someone please make me an aspect to improve my next roll because it's a weak skill for me?
Yeah, that's kind of a different question. Fate does, I mean, I'm no major fan of it. It does have that problem of what are all the aspects of the scene? What are all the aspects on the other players? What other aspects are on these NPCs? I need a heads-up display to play Fate because you just quickly lose track. If I look around, what flashes yellow so I can use it?
Yeah, you definitely... It's very much a system you need cue cards to really run effectively, and maybe that's something you need to consider. Particularly if you're running it online. You know, if you don't have a VTT with a list of aspects, the cards you can throw around, it might be harder to manage.
Works for the GM, or works for the players, doesn't work terribly well for the GM, because the GM has a million aspects to keep track of, because he can't remember all the players' ones to compel them and stuff. And then you're into this weird thing of self-compels, where the players go, actually, I'm going to invoke my own aspect against myself here to get a fate point. And the GM it's this weird thing with the GM, I can veto that. And it's like, okay, this isn't... And because the GM is meant to compel you, but a lot of the time the GM doesn't compel you because the GM doesn't remember all of your aspects because you've got 6 of them and there's 6 players. So he's got to remember 36 of them. I had an aspect of one of my characters only following orders, never got compelled. And I was like, how did that one never get compelled? I worked in a hierarchy. So craziness. Other thing about Fate and modifiers is the best tactic in Fate is you have a 6-player game and you're in a fight. 5 people create an aspect and pass the free tag along to the 6th player, who goes, I invoke all of these and hit the bad guy with an attack that takes him out 1 hit. That's the secret way to break Fate.
It's the more nuanced version of the henchman mass driver.
That's teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. But it's just that once you know that, you're like, oh man.
Okay, we got to move on from this.
Yeah.
Let's crack on.
All right.
Conrad, sorry, we've no idea. But I would say, if there's a lot of modifiers in your game, have your homework done. Be ready. And that should be everybody's job. Okay, what's next? I'll read the next one. Let me see. Where is it? Roger. Who's Roger? Hello, Roger.
Roger GS is how he's identified himself in the question.
Okay, Roger. So 5e, 5th Ed, Dungeons and Dragons. Relevant text from Fireball. And quote, it ignites flammable objects in the area that aren't being worn or carried. Roger observes that if you're holding a papery-thin scroll stretched out between your 2 hands, a fireball blossoms all around you. The scroll is as safe as asbestos. Well, you know what I mean. If you let go of the scroll and it wafts to the ground, it gets burnt up. Is abject suspension of disbelief necessary to avoid the slightest hint of a negative play experience? Is this question about Fireball or is this suspension of disbelief?
A suspension of disbelief mostly, I would say. A shout out to Roger, who I believe is an old L5R compatriot of mine from late of the US and the UK. So it is about suspension of disbelief, and what it comes down to is, do you want your system to be a game first with some, real life kind of flavoring, or you want your game to try and simulate real life to a certain extent? Does stuff happen because it's realistic? Because I've got bad news for you if you think any RPG is realistic. They're all ludicrous abstractions. My question there would be, if you put a flavour on, okay, Fireball can burn scrolls. If you decide that, you're generating a particular flavour on your world, which is that stuff is ephemeral, use it or lose it. Like, if you had the metagame of scrolls get destroyed by Fireball, by the way, whether they're on your ground or on your person, what is going to be your approach to scrolls?
I'm speed reading.
You are using them up pretty much as quickly as you get them, and you might be like, can I get a case to put my scroll in so Fireball doesn't kill it? Because that'll be the player's first question. If you have Fireball destroy held scrolls, it'll be, can I get a case to put my scroll in that doesn't burn up? And maybe that's a magic item you can give the people so they have a small amount of safe scrolls to put away. It is down to, like, negative play experience comes down to what the players want. Like, you can play games which are ludicrously harsh, and people play games that are ludicrously harsh. Not usually RPGs, but because people get their feelings hurt quite a bit when they're, like, their special character, bad stuff happens to them, bits of them get chopped off or whatever. But there are games where people relish, oh man, then I got my arm cut off, oh, and then I got my legs cut off, and oh, then I got my head cut off. And that's the experience they want. They want a character who has a grisly demise. Some people want that.
Time for some Vecna upgrades.
Yeah, or whatever. Like, I want to play Wolfrup because of the crit table. Or I want to play, like, I've been playing Kingdom Death, and there's an awful lot of your characters die an awful lot in frankly unfair ways. And there are rules variants which remove some of the lol, your character drew an event card, your character's dead, in favour of things. So people go, oh, this isn't true Kingdom Death, and so go, no, it's a different flavour of it. Do you want the random death to happen? It's like XCOM. Do you want your guys to die a lot? That's part, like, isn't a lot. Do you want to miss 99% shots? That's XCOM, Like, that's the play experience of it. And if you don't want that, like Dark Souls, man, this combat is really reflex and pattern recognition heavy. That's Dark Souls. If you don't like that, don't play Dark Souls, is kind of the response. So it comes down to what you want your game to be like. And this is session 0 stuff for the most part. Do you want the game to be often harsh? Like, do you want to put in, here are the 10 bad things that will happen to you? Or this is 10 of the 50 bad things that will happen to you in the game. I'm telling you about 10. The rest of them you will learn as you go. Like fireballs burning up scrolls. If I was doing that as a GM, I would be very tempted to write down all the consequences in advance and then reveal them later. To go, okay, this is a game where bad stuff happens, but as you play, like if you're playing this as, like let's say you're playing a D&D, a first ed D&D game, and your whole thing was experiential dungeon crawling, and you go down to dungeons and lots of your players die and some of your guys get back out, and then you send in a new crew of guys to do the next bit of the dungeon, or you recruit a new bunch of guys to replace your dead players. You could have, here are 50 crazy traps or hazards or monsters, like fireballs burning up your scrolls, like green slime, like, puce vapors or something. You make up a bunch of hazards that no one's experienced before. They horribly kill you, and the players go, okay, let's write down what that is so we know how to deal with it the next time. And that's an experiential dungeon crawler.
Building their codex.
Yeah, and players might dig that. And they also might be like, I was really hoping to tell the tale of Vengeful the One-Horned and not have him inhale puce vapor, vomit up his nervous system and have it run away and become a monster you fight the next time. I didn't want that to happen.
Has he got any sons? A brother?
Yeah, but I mean...
An identical uncle?
Do you want to send more people into the wood chipper? It's... you can do it. But I think if you're going, I want there to be no negative play experiences in my game, you have to discuss with your players. First and foremost, what is a negative play experience? Because some people hate missing attacks. That's a negative play experience for them. Constantly missing attacks is a negative play experience. And if enough of your players have that hang up, like I once saw a player playing Woofrup and go, oh, I hate meta currencies, I don't want to use them. And it's like, they're bad luck protection. And he's like, rolled, missed, and then spent 5 minutes agonizing over whether to spend a fortune point or not. That's like, dude, like, and complaining about there being a meta currency.
Has he still got his communion money?
Yeah, like, spend it, dog. They come back every session. You got 3 of them. Spend it. If you want to hit, spend a reroll.
What do you think on this one, Scarr?
I largely agree with the sentiment of the things. It's like, negative play experience is a flavor. It is like, do you want to triumph over the punishment, or do you get enough punishment in your normal day life that you just sort of want a bit of winning on a Thursday night or whatever? That's very fine. But I'm actually kind of curious about the other aspect of it. When Roger brings up the point about the fireball and it burns your scrolls or whatever, I had a similar thought of something I think about is stuff getting wet. Like, you find this sort of flooded section of the dungeon, you jump in to get to the secret area. Well, what happened to all of your iron rations, all your torches, all those potions and scrolls? Did they actually get through? It's the realism versus, I wouldn't call it negative play experiences, is like the bookkeeping of how much stuff people keep on them. Because this kind of stuff that comes up when you have like your encumbrance heavy game, where the fact that you brought your scrolls and your potions will matter because you're in this big intense resource burning dungeon crawl, for example, and you want to know, well, if my axe is rusty, I can't cut through doors, so do I jump in the water or not? Maybe I want a fireball to help dry out all my stuff. But then I think about it, it's just like, if you're like, say it's your like second level guy and he's for some reason holding out a scroll continuously, and he runs into a door and there's a glyph of warding or whatever goes off, hits him for 3d6 fireball, and his scrolls burn. And yeah, maybe you could spend 3 or 4 minutes going through his inventory saying what stuff's in his backpack, what stuff is in his belt, and see how charred and, does he come out of Looney Tunes covered in soot? That's fine. But when you're, say, level 10 and you're being hit by a fireball or 2 every round because it's still the best damage spell in the game, even when you're level 10, because scaling, do we want that sort of same set of realism to apply. No, we have a situation that we want that's sort of situational. You got hit by fire, does all your stuff burn? That is a lot more marginal than the more universal problem of I have hit points that the monster wants me to not have anymore. The best way for the monster to get rid of my hit points is fireball, which is a more universal problem in a actual RPG. I'm making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm picking my way past all the $10 words, but yeah, I get what you're laying down.
Like, if you want to have this kind of gameplay where stuff on your body is important and how waterproof or fireproof is your rucksack, that's fine, but you probably want a system that has, like, a little paper doll for where you put all your belt pouches and backpack and, your sack. Worrying about it in your average freewheeling adventure seems like it's...
Okay, I'm going to throw a take in here. So is abject suspension of disbelief necessary? Well, I think, Roger, if you're still with us, Roger, kind of missing a kind of a temporal aspect of this. Let's go back to the example. I'm casting a spell with my paper thin scroll and fireball goes off. Now, what's happened in the game of, let's assume it's D&D, is that it's a 6-second round, which everyone takes their turn to describe what they do in that 6 seconds, and describe and resolve mechanically what they do in that 6 seconds in sequence. Fastest initiative goes first. But the reality is that all of those actions are actually layered over each other in the same 6 seconds. So in the example where the fireball goes off and I'm reading my scroll's still going to get read unless I die. The fireball is going to go off and paper burns. But you've got to try and imagine that instead of it being a static sequence of events where fireball deploys and resolves, and I'm left standing there, scroll in hand, intact, minus some hit points. What's really happening is that you're reading the scroll and the fireball is going off, and you're reacting to the fireball going off, and probably doing something like turning away to shield the scroll from the flames, or snapping it closed for long enough to escape the flames if you dodge away, or take the damage, etc. And, mechanically and computationally, role-playing games can only do so much to preserve that sense of the simulation running at full fidelity all the time. It has to break things up into steps. And those steps do sometimes result in oddities like this, where if you just treat it as a sequence of events, then logically burning should have destroyed scroll. But the reality is that burning and scroll reading and dodging and dying and all the rest are happening at the same time. And it's up to the GM and the players and it's a kind of a slightly more advanced GM technique is to take all of those steps in that 6 seconds and resolve and kind of reiterate them for the players so that they understand all the things that have gone on and create a moving picture out of those still images, those discrete actions. And that's what helps you get over this suspension of disbelief. It's not that the simulation is going to get any more fidelity?
Felicitous?
There's no more fidelity built in. Oh boy, murdering the English language. There's no more fidelity arises from the mechanical aspects of this. And you're really not... you've got to do the same amount of work to suspend your disbelief. But if you have a good revision of the things that have just happened, it will help you to sort of understand that all of this stuff was going on at one time rather than being a discrete sequence of steps. Negative play experience, as Eoin says, sometimes you're in a hard game and hard things happen. And if you want to avoid all negativity in a play experience, don't play anything where you have the possibility of losing. You will eventually lose. What you have to understand is that it feeds a richer play experience, a better play experience where you learn from those losses and develop better techniques and better strategies and you prep better or whatever it is. Alright, that's me.
One more question for the road. I believe Eoin had one.
Yes. I was surfing on RPGs on Reddit, the RPG forum, and I noticed someone asking a question. A player wants to be a tactician, but sucks at it. They misspelled tactician.
Tactician.
I thought it was really funny. A player wants to be a tactician but sucks at it. He wants to be a combination of Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan leading armies and crushing all before him, but he is completely inept at running the war game aspect of the RPG. His tactics basically boil down to attack with everything and try to win the battle as fast as possible. Which you can do if the game engine supports it as a good tactician, but what does he do? Like, what does the GM do to represent the fact that this character is meant to be a tactical genius? Well, my first question would be, has he invested stuff in making his character a tactical genius? Has he taken any of the, some skills to represent that as being so? And if that's his fantasy and that's what he wants to happen, and you're okay with facilitating that, you may just have to calibrate all the opposition to be even more inept than he is. And I'm not sure how you do that necessarily. It's a problem because if he's really, really, really bad, he won't know he's bad. He'll just assume that every time he loses, it's just because of egregiously bad luck. If he's merely bad, he probably knows he's bad at it. In which case, you're probably going to either have a discussion with him along the fact that, dude, you're trying to do this, but you suck at it. I'm going to scale the opposition so that they're even worse than you. Which is that I'm putting training wheels in your bike so you don't hurt yourself conversation, but you're having it with a 25-year-old. And, you might have to have that conversation with a 25-year-old. Dude, you can't ride a motorbike. You're too clumsy. You've got to do something else instead. Which is an awkward conversation to have. We all hate those. We all want to avoid them. But you might have to have that conversation. Dude, you suck at tactics. I can abstract it so that you you get the fantasy of your character. But if you're running it, you're not. Unless you get better, it's not getting good. Unless you get better, this problem is not going to get better.
A lot of it will depend on the actual RPG wargame system he's using, because in some wargame abstraction systems, the main tactic would actually be to roll well, because you'll have your D20 versus the enemy D20, and it's a matter of rolling, and at best tactics might give you a +1 or +2 to the roll, but it's actually mostly about outnumbering modifiers or something like that. Maybe a terrain modifier too. If it's done out in little sort of an actual war game, well, that's sort of the thing you learn by losing at a bit, but not everyone has the tolerance for losing and learning. Okay, we assume that we're talking about some kind of basic card-based system, like he put a bunch of playing cards with these are my archers, these are my things, and sort of move them around a little grid or something. We assume that's what the situation is, or are we assuming it's a role, or is it completely free Kriegspiel? Describe what your army is doing. Oh, okay.
No, there's units. They're moving units around.
Yeah, okay.
But do they have a war game sort of resolving?
They have an abstracted wargaming resolving thing, as far as I can tell.
Okay, right.
So it is basically you're playing very fast resolving Warhammer or something equivalent to that.
Okay, so are we dealing with a stone cold idiot here? That's question number one.
Now he's not an idiot. He's just.
I know. And I'll be slightly cruel and say that sometimes this question reminded me specifically of another common sort of a similar problem that comes up with the silver tongue or diplomat or face character in a party who's being played by someone who can't string a sentence together. But they love the idea of a smooth talker. And in many role-playing systems, there are concrete mechanical ways to build characters that have great persuasion or intimidation or fast talk. And you can rely on that. The experience at the table is that they knock out some misconstrued droggle and then roll with a fantastic modifier, and the GM sort of has to accept that result and go, yeah, the guard nods along to your story about taking your mum to the doctors while you're pushing this cart full of dead bodies, and believes every word you say and lets you pass. And everyone yucks and rolls their eyes, and I'm okay. But if they're stone cold idiots, they're like, "That's fantastic! I did so well there. I'm so good." They constructed a character. Tactician, similar problem. However, you do have the added wrinkle that there's this war game sort of resolution element where their actual ineptitude might just get you killed and game over. I would be in favour in that case of finding some way to mechanically decouple their bad decisions from the outcomes, giving them a steering wheel that's not really attached to anything, or that it kind of mitigates some of their poor choice making.
We're going to an awful lot of effort to, protect this person from the rest of the game.
Yeah, well, they're a friend of mine. You've got to assume that this is someone that the question asker's like, I like this person well enough to play with them. I don't want to stomp all over their power fantasy. I mean, I can't lift a car, but no one's going to stop me from putting together a character who's effectively the Hulk. This guy ain't no Genghis Khan. But in the power fantasy of friendly gaming with our mates, where the stakes aren't terribly high, throw a guy a bone, So, and sometimes you just kind of have to put the bumpers in the gutters and let them believe that the strike was all their own effort.
And the other related problem to that is it's a multi-person game. So the other players are pretty decent at the strategy end of it. This guy's fantasy is he's the great tactician, and he's easily the worst of them at it.
Just imagine the cast of The Office playing D&D. I think we know who the tactician is. I think there are ways to kind of enable the tactician fantasy while giving the other players at the table a bit more input. Say the tactician is handing out big bonuses, but they've only got a few of them, and they have to be judicious in when they hand them out. And they'll look around the table and go, well, it is in my mind I should give it to the leader of the archers and my cavalry officer, and they give the other players these bonuses. And the other players then use those bonuses to win the battle. And the tactician player can quite sort of justly say, well, I gave them the bonuses. Part of this victory is down to my great leadership, and the other players that know well enough to know which side is going to win in this side. They can go, yeah, absolutely, good job, man, thank you, really appreciated the help.
It seems maybe this is my version of the putting on the training wheels, but if you can turn the front line general into an armchair general at the back lines, handing out these bonuses to the people who are good at this, that might be a better play experience than, I command these 5 troops, we will send them charging into the enemy guns, they will clog the barrels with their dead, and it'll be great.
Did win battles on occasion.
That sort of raises the question, is there mechanical support in the game for that? Can, like as you say, can he invest in feats to make him a tactical genius or skills, or is this war game so abstracted that it's all down to the orders you give, and if he gives the wrong orders, then no amount of geniusing in the backstory can save those poor soldiers.
With enough mechanics, you can make even a dullard almost undefeatable. That's one of the things, though. You can be like, okay, we normally roll a d20 to see who hits and how much damage. We normally roll how much damage. So when you're fighting my guys, you have to roll 3d20 and take the lowest one, and I get to roll 5d20 and take the highest one, and we'll see who wins. And you'll be like, mathematically, my chance of winning is, yep. You can always do that.
What would you suggest, Owen? The steering wheel connect to nothing is a pretty awful solution.
It is what you would do with someone who is
a complete idiot.
Not an idiot, just
no self-awareness whatsoever.
Full Dunning-Kruger
Absolutely.
is terrible, but has no appreciation that they're terrible. Life is a mystery where bad things happen to them for no reason that they can figure out.
So let's assume that they've figured out how peekaboo works.
It's often just in one area. It's like, you're just terrible at this, man. You're beyond bad at this. It's like it's the corollary to the old the old asshole one, which is if you meet one person in a day who's an asshole, you just met an asshole. If everyone you meet is an asshole, you're probably the asshole. If everyone you meet is better, luckier than you, it's probably not that. It's probably the fact that they're better than you. If they can't figure that out, what you need to do is say, do you really want to do this? And then give them a bunch of abilities to enable or get around it. Like massive mechanical bonuses to make him appear like a tactical genius. He goes, yeah, charge those cavalry unsupported up the hill into the pike infantry with the cannons. And you're like, yeah, he's got a brilliant plan for how to do this. Reenactment of the charge of the light brigade. Yeah, he does it. He kills them all. They just march. They march up the hill. 200 men march up that hill and slaughter 10,000 entrenched infantry with 100 cannon support. Yep. How?
Great leadership.
So damn good.
Just
so damn good.
Brilliant leader. Yeah, I mean,
just
rousing
beyond
speech beforehand.
Yeah, rousing speech beforehand, and he pointed with a sword, and they were all like, "Let's do this thing," and yep, got him.
Well, part of it is like that is how it is presented in a lot of movies.
Yeah. And that's the fantasy the person wants to play out, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what the person's after. So if you're inclined to indulge them, yep, go ahead. Yep, go ahead. You know,
Scarr, you got a code to add to this.
It's just that, yeah, it's like we're being very harsh to this hypothetical person, but yeah, that is how an awful lot of military tactics are done in movies. Is like I give a really rousing speech, I point my sword at the enemy, and this causes my group of plucky rebels, 10 strong, armed with butter knives, to fight like demons, and they win. And it's just like, that is a legitimate fantasy to have, certainly, but it is, however, a very Hollywood fantasy, and if you are playing a non-Hollywood game where, you know, we actually want to find things like terrain and such things, this is like, that's a mismatch in the expectation of the game versus the expectation of the player. And yeah, you're probably going to have to house in some bonuses. And I would not be against adding in, well, I'm a tactical genius, so I get this bonus. But also give the other players their... Just say that you've had 3 battles now, and yes, you've had horrible casualties in all of them, but let's not worry about that. That means you get your general feat, or your lieutenant commander feat, your shogun feat, whatever, and each of you gets a bonus. And you know, you could give a bonus to Mr. Tactical Genius of when blindly charging into enemy fire, your troops all get advantage and the enemy is disadvantaged to hit them, and then give slightly more appropriate bonuses to the other players. And we'll assume in this case that the other players will go along with this as order to cover up party disadvantage, even if on a player-by-player basis this is maybe not 100% balanced. Basically, if you don't have the mechanics, put the mechanics in.
Right, well, that's been... I mean, yes, I guess we'll... I don't want to say that's it, but that's pretty much it. That's all we got on that one, right?
We have offered the solutions we have.
Yeah, it's not tough choices, tough talks. We carved above the lintel on the door to the clinic is talk to your players /GM. That's a kind of a given for all of these problems, but we don't want to just land on that kind of pat simple solution. So yeah, I hope some of what we've discussed today has eased your concerns, answered your questions, or incited your ire. If the latter, come find us on Discord.
or email the clinic, but through party@theventureparty.net to tell us why we're wrong and force us to make an episode explaining why we were wrong and how we are now right.
No corrections. Okay, well, if that's that, let's rev up the clinic, for it is a travelling van that goes to where the problems are and solves them through montages. But until we arrive at the next sleepy little town in sore need of explosions, this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY. Or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventureparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventureparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventure Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.
Into the custom 1982 GMC van and pull away.
Stethoscopes and hand grenades waving in the wind.